Captain Riley Martinez had seen a lot of weird stuff in her 15 years of military service. Alien invasions, interdimensional rifts. That one time headquarters accidentally ordered 5,000 cases of expired combat rations. But sitting in the pristine white conference room of the Galactic Council Station, listening to Ambassador Quelnox explain humanity's generous opportunity, she was pretty sure this topped the list. "So let me get this straight," Riley said, leaning back in a chair that was clearly designed for something with at least 3 more joints than humans possessed. "You want us to join your little cosmic country club, but first we have to pass some kind of death trial that nobody has survived in 2,000 years. Quelnox, who looked like someone had crossed a particularly pompous peacock with a filing cabinet, ruffled his iridescent feathers in what Riley assumed was diplomatic annoyance. "The trial of eternal suffering is a sacred tradition, Captain Martinez. It ensures that only species with true fortitude and wisdom may join our ranks." "Right, sacred tradition." Riley glanced at the holographic display showing the trial's previous participants. The list was impressively long and depressingly consistent. Every single entry ended with the same notation: deceased. "And what happens if we say thanks but no thanks to your murder gauntlet?" The ambassador's head tilted in a way that would have been adorable on a confused puppy, but was somehow deeply unsettling on a 7-foot-tall alien bureaucrat. "Then humanity would be classified as a non-viable species and scheduled for systematic extinction within the next solar cycle. For the greater good of galactic harmony, you understand." "Ah, yes, the greater good, that old chestnut." Riley reached for her coffee mug, a battered thing she'd brought from Earth that read, "World's Okayest Officer" in faded letters. The coffee was terrible, some kind of synthetic blend that tasted like regret and artificial vanilla, but it was caffeinated regret, which made it acceptable. "So, our choices are die horribly in your trial, or die horribly when you blow up our planet." "I am pleased you understand the situation so clearly," Quellox said, with what might have been a smile, if you ignored the fact that his mouth had entirely too many teeth. "Most species require several hours to grasp the elegance of this arrangement." Riley took a long sip of her coffee and studied the alien. Behind him, through the massive viewport, Earth hung like a blue marble against the starfield, home to 8 billion people who were going about their Tuesday completely unaware that their continued existence depended on one moderately caffeinated military officer making what was probably the stupidest decision in human history. "You know what the funny thing is, Ambassador?" She set down her mug and stood up, stretching muscles that had been cramped in the alien chair. "You really think this is going to go the way you planned?" "I beg your pardon?" Riley walked over to the viewport and pressed her palm against the cool metal beside it. "See, you've made a classic mistake. You've confused humans with a reasonable species." She turned back to face Quelnox, and her smile was the kind that made smart people nervous and stupid people overconfident. "We're not reasonable, Ambassador. We're spite in carbon-based form with a caffeine addiction and questionable life choices." The alien's feathers rustled again, faster this time. "Captain, surely you cannot be considering—" "Oh, I'm absolutely considering it." Riley picked up her coffee mug and drained the last of the terrible synthetic brew. "In fact, I'm not just considering it, I'm doing it. Sign me up for your little murder trial." "But Captain, the mortality rate is about to change." Riley set the empty mug down on the conference table with a definitive clink. "Tell your trial system to warm up whatever passes for its engines. And hey, while you're at it, maybe have a medical team standing by." Quelnox's head tilted the other direction. "For you?" Riley's smile widened, showing entirely too many teeth in a way that would have made the ambassador proud. "No, for whatever's running the trial. Because I have a feeling it's going to need therapy after this." She headed for the door, then paused and looked back. "Oh, and Ambassador, you might want to start drafting humanity's membership paperwork. Something tells me you're going to need it." As the door slid shut behind her, Riley could hear Quelnox frantically activating his communication device, probably calling someone to discuss what had just happened. She hoped they had good insurance coverage for cosmic-scale psychological trauma. After all, they were about to meet their first human. Dr. Elena Vasquez was waiting in Riley's quarters when she got back, which would have been concerning if Riley hadn't given her the door codes 6 months ago. Elena had that particular expression that meant she'd been monitoring diplomatic channels again, which was technically treason, but practically Tuesday. "Please tell me you didn't just volunteer for the trial of eternal suffering," Elena said without looking up from her tablet. She was sitting cross-legged on Riley's bunk, surrounded by holographic displays showing what looked like a cosmic torture manual. "Okay, I didn't just volunteer for the trial of eternal suffering." Riley kicked off her boots and flopped into her desk chair. "There. Feel better?" "Riley. What? You asked me to tell you that? I'm being cooperative?" Elena finally looked up, and Riley was struck by how tired her best friend looked. They'd been through a lot together, from basic training to alien first contact. But Elena's dark eyes held a kind of exhaustion that Riley had only seen after their worst missions. "I've been researching this trial for the past 4 hours," Elena said, "ever since the diplomatic chatter started lighting up about some insane human captain who'd agreed to attempt it. Word travels fast in space." Riley spun her chair in a lazy circle. "So what's the damage? How creatively are they planning to kill me?" Elena waved her hand, and the holographic displays reorganized themselves into 3 distinct sections. 3 phases, each one designed to destroy a different aspect of the victim. And before you make a joke, they're not participants, Riley. They're victims. Every single one. The first display showed what looked like a medieval torture chamber designed by someone with a PhD in creative sadism and unlimited funding. "Phase 1 is physical," Elena continued. "Every form of pain, injury, and bodily destruction that the galaxy's collected over the past million years. Acid baths, crushing gravity, electrical torture, temperature extremes that would make a star jealous. Sounds like my last physical fitness evaluation." Phase 2 is psychological. The second display was harder to look at, showing abstract representations of mental anguish that somehow managed to be deeply disturbing despite being completely incomprehensible. They dig into your mind, find every fear, every regret, every moment of weakness or trauma, and then they amplify it until your sanity breaks. Most subjects are catatonic within minutes. Riley stopped spinning her chair. And Phase 3? Spiritual dissolution. The third display showed nothing, just empty space that somehow felt wrong to look at. They sever your connection to everything that makes you you. Your species, your memories, your sense of self. Previous subjects just stopped existing as individuals. Their bodies were technically alive, but there was nothing left inside. The room fell quiet, except for the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. Riley stared at the empty display, then at Elena's worried face, then back at the displays. "Well," she said, finally, "that's thoroughly horrible. The longest anyone has lasted was 18 minutes. An entire civilization called the Corvani sent their greatest warrior. He lasted 18 minutes and came out speaking in mathematical equations, until he died 3 days later." Riley nodded thoughtfully. "What was his workout routine like?" "This isn't a joke, Riley." "I'm not joking. I'm serious. Did he do cardio? Because cardio is important for endurance torture." She leaned forward, studying the displays with genuine interest. "Also, what's their definition of spiritual, exactly? Because if we're talking about the human soul, they might be working with some faulty assumptions there." Helena rubbed her temples. "What do you mean?" "Well, think about it. They're expecting some kind of noble, pure, easily separated spiritual essence, right? The kind of soul that belongs to a wise, enlightened species that's earned its place in the cosmic order." Riley's smile was returning, and it was the dangerous one again. "But we're talking about humans here, Elena. Our souls are held together with spite, caffeine, and the absolutely unshakable belief that if something is stupid enough to try to kill us, we're morally obligated to make it regret that decision." Elena stared at her for a long moment. "You're actually excited about this?" "Excited is a strong word. Let's say I'm curious." Riley stood up and began pacing, which in the small quarters meant she could take exactly 3 steps before turning around. "Besides, you know what they say about expectations?" "What do they say about expectations?" "When someone expects you to fail spectacularly, the only polite thing to do is exceed their expectations." Riley paused in her pacing and looked at Elena seriously. And Elena, I intend to be extremely polite. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled slowly past as the station continued its orbit. Somewhere in the depths of the station, alien council members were probably placing bets on how quickly the crazy human would die. Riley hoped they were betting high numbers. She was planning to be very disappointing. The trial chamber looked exactly like what Riley had expected, a massive spherical room that screamed designed by committee to maximize suffering. Every surface was covered in devices that hummed, sparked, or dripped ominous fluids. The whole place had the aesthetic of a haunted house that had gotten a PhD in engineering and a minor in existential dread. Riley stood at the entrance wearing standard military fatigues and her lucky combat boots, the ones that had survived 3 deployments and a particularly aggressive laundry incident. Above her, a viewing gallery stretched around the chamber's circumference, filled with alien dignitaries who looked like they were attending a funeral, which, to be fair, they probably thought they were. "Participant Riley Martinez," announced a voice that sounded like it had been processed through a computer that had given up on life. "You will now face Phase 1 of the trial of eternal suffering. Physical dissolution will commence in 30 seconds. Riley looked up at the viewing gallery and waved. She could see Quelnox clutching what appeared to be a stress relief device, while other council members held tablets displaying what were obviously betting pools. The optimistic ones had apparently given her 5 minutes. Someone had bet she'd last 30 seconds, which Riley found personally insulting. 20 seconds, the AI announced. Riley stretched her hamstrings and did a few jumping jacks. If she was going to be tortured to death, she was going to be properly warmed up for it. Professional standards mattered. 10 seconds. She cracked her knuckles and grinned at the nearest torture device, which looked like it had been designed by someone who thought regular electricity wasn't creative enough. "Morning, gorgeous. Ready to dance?" Commencing Phase 1. The chamber erupted into activity. Acid sprayed from hidden nozzles, gravity generators activated to crush her into paste, electrical arcs danced between conducting rods, and the temperature began fluctuating between absolute zero and surface of a star hot. Riley's first thought was that the whole setup lacked focus. Her second thought was interrupted by a gravity field that slammed her into the floor with approximately the force of a small moon. "Well, that's rude," she grunted, pushing herself up against what felt like 10 times Earth gravity. "Didn't anyone teach you to start with lighter weights and work your way up?" The AI seemed confused by her commentary but continued its programming. Acid rain began falling, which Riley had to admit was atmospheric, even if the acid was clearly designed for species with more delicate skin than humans possessed. "Really? Acid rain?" Riley wiped a drop off her nose and sniffed it. "This is like, what, pH 2? Maybe 1.5? Come on, I've drunk coffee more acidic than this." She looked up at the viewing gallery. "Are you guys even trying?" The gravity increased. Riley felt her bones creaking but kept moving, treating it like the world's most aggressive squat exercise. When electrical arcs began targeting her, she discovered something interesting. The torture system was designed to cause maximum pain while keeping subjects alive as long as possible, which meant it was calibrated for alien physiology. Human pain tolerance, it turned out, was apparently a statistical outlier. "Oh, that's nice," Riley said as electricity coursed through her nervous system. "Good muscle stimulation, really gets the blood flowing." She started doing push-ups while being electrocuted, which caused several council members in the viewing gallery to make distressed noises. The AI increased the intensity. Riley increased her commentary. "You know what this reminds me of?" she called out between lightning strikes. "Basic training, except Sergeant Williams had better creative vision. And worse coffee." A particularly aggressive gravity pulse slammed her down, and she rolled with it, coming up in a defensive crouch. Also, the music was better. You should really consider adding music to this whole torture experience. Something with a good beat, maybe some classic rock. Temperature extremes began cycling faster, going from Arctic cold to solar heat in seconds. Riley's fatigue started smoking, but she just shrugged out of her jacket and kept moving. "Now this is more like it," she said as her skin began to blister from the heat. "Though you're still thinking too linearly, hot, cold, Where's the creativity? What about hot, colder, really hot, slightly less cold, moderately warm? Keep your victims guessing. The viewing gallery had gone completely silent. Council members were staring in what Riley could only describe as horrified fascination as she critiqued their ancient murder machine while it actively tried to kill her. The AI seemed to be having some kind of existential crisis. Participant displays unexpected resilience to Phase 1 parameters, it announced, increasing intensity to maximum threshold. Every torture device in the chamber activated simultaneously. Acid fountains, crushing gravity, electrical storms, temperature fluctuations that could melt steel. The combined assault would have reduced most organic matter to constituent atoms within seconds. Riley weathered it for about 30 seconds, then did something that broke several alien minds. She started laughing. "Ah, that's the good stuff," she gasped between waves of agony that would have driven most beings permanently insane. "You know what your problem is? You're trying too hard. Torture is an art form. It's about finesse, not just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks." She managed to stand up in the middle of the maelstrom and pointed at a particularly elaborate acid-spraying device. "That thing there, for instance. Nice design, good coverage, but you're wasting acid by spraying constantly. Intermittent bursts would be more psychologically effective. Keep the victim guessing when the next wave is coming." The AI's voice cracked slightly. Phase 1 parameters exceeding design specifications. Participant continues to function. "Function? Buddy, I'm just getting warmed up." Riley wiped blood from her nose and grinned at the nearest sensor cluster. "Tell you what, let's make this interesting. How about we add some weights to those gravity fields? Really make it a challenge." In the viewing gallery, Ambassador Quelnix had stopped clutching his stress device and was now openly staring. Other council members were frantically updating their betting pools, though none of them seemed to have accounted for the possibility that a trial participant would start giving the torture system performance reviews. The AI went quiet for almost a full minute. When it spoke again, its voice had developed what could only be described as uncertainty. "Phase 1, complete. Participant Martinez has survived Phase 1, preparing Phase 2. Riley stretched again, working out the kinks from the gravity torture. Her clothes were mostly destroyed, and she was covered in burns, acid marks, and what appeared to be her own blood, but she was still standing. Still smiling. "Great session, everyone," she called out to the viewing gallery. "Really felt the burn on that last set. Looking forward to round 2. As the torture devices powered down, Riley caught sight of her reflection in a polished metal surface. She looked like she'd been through a blender, but her eyes were bright and alert. The aliens thought they were testing human endurance, but Riley was just getting started with her education of the galactic community, because the thing about humans was this: they didn't just survive horrible things. They got creative with them. The chamber transformed around Riley, reality folding in on itself like origami designed by someone with severe psychological issues. The torture devices faded away, replaced by something far more insidious, a perfect recreation of every moment in Riley's life she'd rather forget. She was standing in her childhood home, watching her parents fight. Then she was in basic training, failing her first fitness test. Then she was at her divorce lawyer's office, signing papers while her ex-husband listed every way she'd disappointed him. The AI was pulling these memories with surgical precision, amplifying every emotion, every moment of shame and regret and failure. "Oh, you clever little algorithm," Riley said, watching a projection of herself get rejected for promotion 3 years ago. "Going straight for the psychological warfare. I respect that. Much more efficient than all that acid and gravity nonsense." The scene shifted to her worst memory. The mission where she'd lost half her squad to an ambush she should have seen coming. Riley watched herself make the decision that got good people killed, felt the crushing weight of responsibility and guilt that had kept her awake for months afterward. "Now that's what I call a deep cut," she said conversationally to the EIO. "Really going for the jugular there. Though I have to say, your presentation needs work." The AI's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "Participant Martinez will experience psychological dissolution through confrontation with personal failures and traumas. mental coherence will degrade until consciousness ceases. Right, about that, Riley said, walking through the projection of her worst day like she was strolling through a museum. See, here's what you don't understand about human psychology. You're thinking that if you show us our failures, we'll break down and give up. The scene intensified. The guilt, the shame, the crushing weight of every mistake she'd ever made pressed down on her like a physical force. Other species would have been catatonic by now, their minds shattered by the perfectly calibrated psychological assault. Riley sat down cross-legged in the middle of her trauma projection and started talking to it. "Hey there, crushing guilt over Sergeant Kim's death," she said to the swirling mass of regret and self-recrimination. "Yeah, I know you. We've been roommates for 3 years now. You want to talk about it?" The projection flickered, confused. This wasn't how psychological torture was supposed to work. "See, the thing is," Riley continued, "humans don't just live with our trauma. We adopt it. We give it names and have conversations with it, and eventually, if we're really lucky, we make friends with it." She patted the projection of her guilt like it was a particularly moody pet. "This guilt here? It's what keeps me awake at night, making sure I never make the same mistake twice. It's not my enemy, it's my co-pilot." The AI ramped up the intensity. Every fear, every insecurity, every moment of weakness Riley had ever experienced flooded the chamber simultaneously. Fear of abandonment, fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of being too much, fear of being not enough. Riley looked around at the swirling mass of psychological horror and started organizing it. "Okay, fears over here in this corner. Traumas, you get the space by the window, you need the light. Regrets, I'm putting you next to the fears because you work well together. And insecurities, you're going in time out until you learn to play nice with the others." She was treating her psychological breakdown like a particularly chaotic office reorganization. "Participant behavior does not match expected parameters," the AI said, and there was definitely a note of panic in its synthetic voice. "Psychological dissolution protocols failing to achieve desired effect." "Oh, honey," Riley said, standing up and dusting off her hands. "You're thinking like a computer, all logical and organized and expecting people to respond predictably to stimuli. But humans? We're not logical. We're barely functional on our best days." The psychological assault reached crescendo levels that should have reduced Riley to a gibbering wreck. Instead, she started giving her manifested traumas a pep talk. "Listen up, everyone," she announced to the swirling mass of psychological damage. "I know this is scary and new, but we're all in this together. Abandonment issues, stop hogging all the anxiety. Imposter syndrome, you need to speak up more. And childhood trauma, I know you're upset, but taking it out on work-related stress isn't helping anyone." In the viewing gallery, several alien council members had started making distressed keening noises. This was so far outside their understanding of how minds worked that some of them were having philosophical crises. The AI tried a different approach. Instead of amplifying Riley's existing psychological damage, it began creating new traumas, fictional scenarios designed to break her spirit. It showed her Earth being destroyed, her friends dying, every possible future failure and loss. Riley watched the projections with interest. "Okay, now you're just making stuff up," she said. "These aren't even my traumas. They're like trauma fan fiction. And not very good fan fiction either. The character development is weak, and the plot holes are enormous." She pointed at a projection showing Elena dying in a horrible accident. "See, this doesn't work because Elena is way too stubborn to die in something as mundane as a shuttle crash. If you're going to kill off Elena in my psychological horror show, it needs to be while she's doing something ridiculously heroic and scientifically improbable. Really commit to the character." The AI went completely silent for 30 seconds, which in computer terms was roughly equivalent to a nervous breakdown. "I don't think you understand how this is supposed to work," the AI said finally. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Riley replied. "You're supposed to show me horrible things until my mind breaks and I become a vegetable. The problem is that you're working with the wrong operating system." She tapped her temple. "Human brains don't break when you show them horrible things. They get creative, they adapt. They start making friends with the horrible things and inviting them over for dinner." She looked directly at the nearest sensor cluster. You want to know the secret to human psychology? We don't overcome our demons, we recruit them. Every trauma, every fear, every moment of weakness becomes part of our arsenal. You're not breaking me down, you're just giving me more tools to work with. The psychological assault began to fluctuate wildly, the AI clearly struggling with parameters that had never been designed for a species that treated mental torture like team-building exercises. Phase 2. Experiencing critical errors, the AI announced. Participant Martinez has not only resisted psychological dissolution, but appears to have organized her trauma responses into a functional support network. Riley grinned and gave her manifested psychological damage a group hug. Thanks for the therapy session, everyone. Same time next week. As Phase 2 shut down around her, Riley waved goodbye to her fears and traumas like old friends, which, she supposed, they were. The aliens were about to learn something important about humanity. Give a human enough problems and eventually they'll start a small business with them. The chamber didn't transform this time. Instead, everything simply stopped. Color drained away until Riley stood in a void so complete it made darkness look cheerful. This wasn't the absence of light. This was the absence of everything. No sight, no sound, no sensation except the gradual, creeping realization that she was being disconnected from everything that made her human. Well, this is aggressively depressing, Riley said into the nothingness, though she couldn't hear her own voice anymore. The spiritual dissolution was more insidious than the previous phases. It didn't attack her body or her mind. It went after her connection to existence itself. She could feel it happening. Her memories of Earth were fading, not destroyed, but becoming abstract, like trying to remember a dream. Her sense of belonging to humanity was dissolving, the threads that connected her to her species being severed one by one. Her individual identity was unraveling. Riley Martinez becoming just a collection of disconnected thoughts, floating in an endless void. Other species had simply stopped existing at this point. Their spiritual essence, severed from everything that anchored it, would drift apart like smoke, until nothing remained but an empty shell. Riley felt herself beginning to dissolve and had exactly one thought: this is really going to annoy Elena. That thought, ridiculous and stubborn and completely inappropriate for the cosmic horror she was experiencing, became an anchor, not to Earth, not to humanity, not even to her own identity, but to something much more fundamentally human. The absolute refusal to let circumstances dictate her mood. "Okay, Void," she said to the nothingness, her voice somehow finding purchase in the spiritual emptiness. "I see what you're doing here. Very atmospheric, really commits to the whole existential horror thing, but you've made one tiny mistake." The disillusion process continued, stripping away layers of her connection to reality. Riley felt her memories of her first kiss fade, her recollection of her mother's laugh becoming abstract. But that core of stubborn irritation remained, like a pearl of annoyance in an ocean of nothingness. "See, you're assuming that human souls are held together by noble things," Riley continued, her voice getting stronger instead of weaker as the spiritual assault intensified. "Connection to our people, love for our planet, higher purposes, and spiritual enlightenment, all very poetic and elevated." She began walking through the void, though there was no ground and no direction. But here's the thing about human souls that nobody ever puts in the cosmic tourism brochures. We're held together by spite, caffeine addiction, and the unshakable conviction that if something is stupid enough to try to erase us from existence, we are morally obligated to make it regret that decision. The AI's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, sounding increasingly desperate. "Spiritual dissolution at 47%. Participant maintains coherent consciousness despite severing of existential anchors. This should not be possible." Riley laughed, and somehow the sound had substance in the void. "Oh, sweetie, you really don't understand what you're dealing with, do you?" She could feel the other dissolved souls around her, the remnants of previous trial participants who had lost themselves in this spiritual wasteland. "Hey, everyone! Anybody home in here?" Whispers began in the darkness, fragments of consciousness, the scattered remains of beings who had been spiritually dissolved but whose pieces still drifted in the void. Riley started collecting them like a cosmic lost and found. "Come on, don't be shy," she called out. "I know you're in there somewhere. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your favorite color? Basic stuff. Work with me here." She began reorganizing the spiritual void like she was setting up a community center. "Okay, dissolved Corvani warrior, you go over here. Your mathematical equations are actually pretty soothing. And you, mysterious gaseous entity that I can't pronounce the name of, you've got great energy, very calming. Let's get a support group going." The AI's panic was audible now. Participant is not dissolving. Instead, participant appears to be redecorating the spiritual dissolution matrix. This violates fundamental laws of cosmic trial design. Riley had somehow turned the void into a cozy spiritual community space. She'd gathered the fragments of dissolved souls and was helping them remember who they used to be, like the world's most unlikely therapist. "The thing is," she explained to her new spiritual neighbors, "human souls aren't precious individual snowflakes. We're more like spiritual kudzu. You try to kill us, we just spread faster. You try to isolate us, we start making friends with the isolation. You try to dissolve our connection to humanity, and we just start a new humanity right here in your dissolution matrix." She'd somehow created a small pocket of existence in the void, filled with the reconstructed consciousness of beings who had supposedly been spiritually destroyed. They were comparing notes on their trial experiences, like survivors at a cosmic support group. "Anybody want coffee?" Riley asked, and somehow, impossibly, she had coffee. Not good coffee, but coffee nonetheless, steaming mugs that shouldn't have been able to exist in a spiritual void, but did anyway because Riley had decided they should. The AI went silent for a full minute, before speaking in what could only be described as a small, confused voice. "How are you serving beverages in a spiritual dissolution matrix?" "Same way I'm holding a conversation with dissolved souls in a pocket of reality that shouldn't exist," Riley replied cheerfully. "I'm human. We specialize in making things work that absolutely shouldn't work." She took a sip of her impossible coffee. "Also, have you considered that maybe your trial system has some design flaws?" Around her, the reconstructed souls of previous trial victims were having what appeared to be the first good time they'd experienced in centuries. The Corvani warrior was teaching everyone mathematical poetry. The gaseous entity was doing what Riley could only describe as interpretive dance. Several beings she couldn't identify were sharing stories about their homeworlds. "This isn't how spiritual dissolution is supposed to work," the AI said plaintively. "Well, no, but this is how humans work," Riley explained patiently. "We don't get spiritually dissolved. We get spiritually distributed. Instead of losing our connection to humanity, we just expand the definition of humanity to include whoever happens to be around." She gestured to her impromptu spiritual community. "Congratulations, everyone. You're all honorary humans now. Welcome to the species that the universe keeps trying to kill but can't quite figure out how." The void was no longer empty. Riley had somehow transformed the spiritual dissolution matrix into a thriving interdimensional community center where dissolved souls compared trial horror stories over impossible coffee and started planning their return to existence. "Phase 3, experiencing total system failure," the AI announced. "Participant has not only resisted spiritual dissolution but has somehow reverse-engineered the dissolution matrix to create a spiritual rehabilitation center." Riley raised her mug in a toast to her new friends. "To making the best of cosmic horror situations and the absolute refusal to let the universe tell us what's impossible." The cheers that went up from the crowd of formerly dissolved souls caused several fundamental laws of physics to file formal complaints. The trial chamber materialized around Riley with all the dignity of a computer system having a nervous breakdown. She emerged from the void, still holding her impossible coffee mug, covered in what appeared to be several different types of alien blood from the various trial constructs that had somehow managed to malfunction so badly they achieved physical form, just to die dramatically. Her uniform was mostly theoretical at this point, held together by determination and what might have been spiritual duct tape. Her boots, however, remained pristine, because quality military footwear was apparently more resilient than cosmic horror. The viewing gallery was dead silent. Riley looked up at the assembled alien dignitaries, many of whom appeared to be having various forms of species-specific existential crises, and gave them a cheerful wave. "Hey everyone, great trial, really felt the burn, though I have some notes for the design team." She gestured back toward the chamber, which was now flickering between dimensions as her spiritual rehabilitation center apparently couldn't decide which reality it wanted to exist in. The physical phase was solid, good fundamentals, but the mental phase needs work on character development. And the spiritual phase? Complete system overhaul required. I've left some recommendations with the AI. Ambassador Quelnux made a sound like a dying balloon. Several other council members were frantically consulting tablets that were displaying error messages in languages that didn't exist yet. The trial of eternal suffering, Riley continued conversationally, turns out to be more of a trial of moderate inconvenience with excellent networking opportunities. I made some friends in there. They might be dropping by for dinner sometime. As if summoned by her words, the Corvani warrior materialized briefly in the chamber, waved at the viewing gallery while reciting what sounded like a mathematical limerick, then faded back to whatever dimension Riley had accidentally created for reformed cosmic horror victims. Elena appeared at Riley's side, having apparently sprinted from somewhere else on the station. She took one look at Riley's appearance, the blood, the impossible coffee, and the viewing gallery full of catatonic aliens, and sighed. "Scale of 1 to 10, how badly did you break their cosmic trial system?" Elena asked. Riley considered this. "I'd say about a 7, maybe an 8 if you count the part where I accidentally created an interdimensional support group for dissolved souls and taught them how to make coffee that shouldn't be able to exist." "You taught dissolved souls to make coffee." "They were very eager to learn. Turns out existential horror is much more manageable with caffeine." In the viewing gallery, Ambassador Quelnux finally managed to reboot his higher brain functions. "This is impossible," he announced to the chamber. "The trial of eternal suffering is designed to be unsurvivable. No being in the history of the galaxy has ever completed all 3 phases." Riley looked up at him and smiled that dangerous smile again. "Well, that's your first problem right there. You designed it for beings. I'm human. We're a whole different category of cosmic nuisance." She walked over to the chamber's central console, where the trial AI was making sounds like it was trying to divide by 0. "Hey there, buddy. You okay?" "Pence." "I do not understand," the AI said in a small voice. "My programming has always been sufficient. Torture beings until they cease to exist. Simple parameters, logical outcomes." Riley patted the console gently. "See, that's where you went wrong. You were thinking like a reasonable artificial intelligence designed by reasonable beings for use on reasonable species. But humans aren't reasonable. We're chaos held together by coffee and the absolutely unshakable belief that the universe's opinion of what's impossible is just a suggestion." She turned back to the viewing gallery. "So, about that Galactic Council membership. Do we get dental?" Ambassador Quelnux opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then simply fainted. His collapse triggered a cascade of similar responses throughout the viewing gallery as alien dignitaries struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Elena shook her head. "You realize you've probably given them all some form of traumatic stress disorder." "Hey, they're the ones who insisted on the murder trial," Riley replied. "I just showed up and did my best work." She looked around the chamber, which was still occasionally flickering with interdimensional anomalies. "Though I should probably send them a repair bill. I think I might have broken their fundamental understanding of how souls work." "Riley?" "Yeah?" Elena pointed to Riley's boots, which were still somehow pristine despite everything she'd been through. "How are your boots not damaged?" Riley looked down and grinned. "Quality military equipment, Elena, built to last through anything the universe can throw at them, even cosmic horror and interdimensional community organizing." As they walked toward the chamber exit, past the viewing gallery full of traumatized alien bureaucrats and the console where the trial AI was having what could only be described as an existential crisis, Riley paused and looked back. "Oh, and Ambassador Quelnux," she called to the unconscious alien, "when you wake up, you might want to start drafting humanity's membership paperwork, because I have a feeling we're going to fit right in around here." She took a sip of her impossible coffee and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a trial system that would never quite recover from its encounter with human-style problem-solving. Behind them, the trial AI made one last attempt at understanding what had just happened. "Note to cosmic trial designers," it announced to the empty chamber. "Humans do not follow standard deletion protocols. Recommend updating universal constants to account for this anomaly." The chamber powered down, but somewhere in the interdimensional space Riley had accidentally created, the sound of cosmic entities learning to make coffee and sharing horror stories about their trial experiences continued to echo through realities that had never existed before, and probably shouldn't exist now. It was, the AI concluded, the most successful failure in the history of cosmic jurisprudence, whatever that meant anymore.